Hi, everyone. I'm Krista Cowan. I'm the corporate genealogist here at Ancestry. Some of you may know me as the Barefoot Genealogist from the YouTube series by the same name. And today we are talking about all things search on Ancestry. So what I hope is that by the end of our hour together today, that you all will be totally proficient at knowing when and where and how to search different ways in order to find your ancestors. So I'm going to share with you a few things. I'm going to share with you kind of my step-by-step process. So I do have a very sequential approach to how I search for information in my family tree. Then I'm going to share some just basic search tips and tricks. So if you're new, that will be the part that you'll want to pay attention to. Then for those of you who've been around for a while, I'm going to share some more advanced search tips and tricks, things that can just really help you dig in there and find what you're looking for. There are some essential tools and features on Ancestry that I'm going to highlight as we go. So even if you've been doing family history for a while, or even if you've been here at Ancestry for a while, I suspect there will be some new things you learn along the way, because the system is really robust and sometimes we don't all know everything there is to know. So before we dive in and I start sharing my screen with you, there are a couple of things that you need to know, just some foundational pieces of information. One is that there are more than 60, I have to look to make sure I get this number right, 65 billion records on Ancestry from 88 countries around the world. And those records date back as far as into like the 12 and 13 and 1400s, all the way up to records that may have just been created from a tombstone or an obituary, for example, for someone who died within the last few weeks. So there is a vast array of information on Ancestry. Now, another thing you might not know is that Ancestry currently indexes and publishes an average of about 5 million new records every day. And what that means is that there's constantly new information coming online. Now, of course, we've been using AI here at Ancestry for more than a decade. And the way that most of you see that show up is as hints in your family tree. So that hint algorithm is AI technology under the covers looking to see, does anything that I just entered into my tree about this person in my family tree match anything in some of these records on Ancestry? So hints, especially if you've watched my Family Tree Building 101 class, hints are just kind of the basic way that we use here at Ancestry to get you started with some what we call low-hanging fruit. Records that look like with a pretty high degree of confidence, probably match the information that you have in your tree about this person. And so we are showing that to you as an opportunity for you to review it, see if it really is your grandfather as a child in the household with his parents when he was, young, or if this really is your great-grandfather's World War I draft card. So we show you those kinds of records in hints as a way to just get you started. However, one of the things that a lot of new people don't realize is that there is more available to you than just the hints. Hints are designed to just get you started, but once you've exhausted all of the hints for a person, the next step is to start searching. So start searching about information about that person. Don't just keep trying to build back in your family tree. One of the things that I say at the end of almost every single virtual event here on Wednesdays, or the Tuesday Facebook Lives that I do, or in my own social media videos, like the thing that I always sign off with is have fun climbing your family tree. And that's because I want to help you make sure that you really are climbing your family tree, not somebody else's. And sometimes if we try to build our trees too quickly or go back too fast, we end up attaching a wrong set of parents and either getting stuck because that person doesn't exist in that relationship, or not being able to find more information, or we spend a whole lot of time and energy finding information about a family that's not even ours. So that's what I'm hoping, really hoping that you get out of our time together today, is an understanding of exactly what it takes to make sure you're climbing your family tree and that you enjoy the process while doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my own family tree so that you can kind of follow along with some of these tips. Now, having a family tree is the best way to leverage all of the tools on Ancestry. So if you have not yet started your own family tree on Ancestry, if you've just been using search functionality or just been using the DNA match list, I would encourage you to do that, because as soon as you start a family tree, you can start leveraging that AI technology that is going to serve up those hints to you. That's the little green leaf that pops up, and you can see I still have leaves in my tree. It's always springtime at Ancestry. Always leaves available, things for me to explore, because remember, an average of 5 million new records a day coming onto the site. So you're going to start with hints. When I talk about just core research strategy for learning more about a person or a group of people in a family in your family tree, the number one thing is to explore those hints, and I hope that you do. The number two thing that I want you to do then is to do a search from your tree. So here's what that looks like. We're going to go to my great-grandmother, Lillian. I actually knew her. I have memories of her from, like, some of my earliest memories are of her. And you can see that I have already attached quite a few records. I have a 1900 census, a 1910 census, I have a 1930 and 40 and 50 census, I have her California death index, I have some newspapers attached and a marriage record and some city directories. Like, I have so many things that I've found. So some of you might question, well, why would I need to go look for anything else? What else could there possibly be? That's a great question. And I hope it's a question that you ask yourself often. Every time you're looking at a person in your tree, especially once you've exhausted the hints, I want you to ask yourself, what else could there possibly be to learn about this person and their life? So on every person profile page in your tree and Ancestry, you have a search button. It's right up here at the top on the right on their person profile page. Hopefully you can see my mouse wiggling here. I tried to make the pointer bigger so you all could see it. And when I click search, here's what's happening. Ancestry is taking everything I know about this person, her name, her birth date and place, her death date and place, her husband's name, her marriage date and place, the names of her parents and her siblings and her children, like everything that makes her her informationally, and it throws it at the search engine. Now, for some of you, like my great-grandma Lillian here, that may be a lot of information. But for some of you, that might be very little information. And you need to remember that, because that's going to matter. Now, if you're ever curious what the search from tree does, when you get to this page, you can click this little pencil icon here at the top of the left-hand Your Search column, okay? And that will open up a window to allow you to edit that search, and it will show you everything it threw at the search engine. So as you can see, lots of information here that it pulled from her profile page. Now, here's the question that I have to you, and this is what I want you to think about. Because starting to understand some of this foundational logic means you're going to approach your searches more successfully. Is there a record that exists anywhere in the world that has all of this information in that one record? And the answer is no, there's not. The only place that all of this information exists in aggregate about her is probably in my tree, maybe in the trees of some of my cousins or siblings. But this is the only place. So there is no record that is going to have all of this information. So what is the search engine supposed to do? Well, the search engine has to decide which of these pieces of information is most important and which of these pieces of information is most likely to be maybe not completely accurate, but close, right? So I may know she was born in 1892, but on a census, the only thing you put on the census is your age. You don't put your birth date. That means the census, depending on when in the year it was taken versus when in the year the birthday is, she could be a year older or a year younger than we might expect her to be. Or if it was the 13-year-old sister who gave the census taker the information because mom was out doing the wash and dad was out on the farm, and when the census taker came to the door, she just grabbed the family Bible off the shelf and read it as best she could and provided the census taker with that information. And great-grandma's age may be off by 3 or 4 years on the census. Or she may now be in her 40s and the census taker comes to the door and she doesn't want to admit her age. And so maybe she makes herself 8 or 9 years younger when she tells him her age. So there's lots of reasons why records might have inconsistent information. So when you throw information at a search engine saying, I want people by this name, born in this time, born in this place, you have to remember that the records don't have all of that information, and the information they do have may not always be accurate or consistent. Now, my great-grandmother was born in Dallas, Texas, but she was born to German immigrant parents, and so her first language was German. She spoke German in the home. To the day she died, she spoke with a German accent because that was all of her early linguistic training was German. She heard German at church and at home and in some of the early schooling she went to. And so even though she was born in Texas, spoke with a German accent. So if a census taker came to the door and heard that, and she said, oh, yes, I was born in Texas, he might not believe her. Or he might have asked where the parents were born, written down Germany, and then just dittoed it down for the rest of the children. So locations aren't always precisely accurate on records either. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen records that play this out in your own family tree. One more thing to keep in mind as you're searching. Dates might be inaccurate or a little swishy. Locations might be precise or broad or incorrect. The other thing to keep in mind is that the way that we spell our names 100 years ago didn't matter. So now the way that we spell our names is part of our identity. Like I'm Krista with a C, no H. That's something that I tell people when I introduce myself sometimes, because the way I spell my name is part of my identity. But prior to Social Security in the 1930s, here in the US at least, that didn't matter. Like how you spelled your name was inconsequential, really, ultimately. And so there are people who weren't literate, who didn't even know how to spell their own name. There are people who spoke their name and the way that it came out sounding with whatever accent they had or whatever understanding the person taking the record, whether it was a census taker or a draft registrar or a person handling your military enlistment or a newspaper reporter. However they heard that name is just how they spelled it. And so it's not that information is spelled wrong, it's that names just didn't have standardized spelling until about, a little less than 100 years ago. And so all of those things you have to kind of keep in the back of your brain as you're approaching the search results, because you're going to get search results and you're going to go, why is Ancestry showing this to me? Well, Ancestry is taking all of those things into consideration in the algorithm when we show you the information. So it has to prioritize which of these fields might be most important. Then it has to consider the swishiness around dates and places and spellings in order to provide you with a list of search results. One question you might be asking is, why do I need to search if Ancestry is just going to keep giving me hints? Well, one thing you may or may not know is that, first of all, not all databases on Ancestry are designated as hint databases, which means the hint algorithm doesn't even look at all of the records on Ancestry in order to provide you with those hints. There's a few reasons for that. One being that not all records have enough information on it for us to have a high confidence that this information matches what you have in your family tree. So searching is the next step after reviewing hints. It should always be. So when I do a search from my tree, I throw everything I know at the search engine and I get a list of search results. And my job as the person who is interested in learning more about my grandmother's life is to review these search results and see, is there anything new that I missed before? Is there anything new that hints missed? Is there any additional information I might want to explore? Now, the first search result here is almost always going to be somebody else's family tree, and I might be curious about that later. I usually want to look at all the records first because I want to make sure I'm not coloring my perception with somebody else's conclusions about who this person is and what records should be attached to them. And so I'm always reviewing records first. The second section you're going to see here on your search results is what we call our SMART filter. So basically what we take into consideration is if you've already attached a bunch of records to your tree, we're going to show you links to them there, but then we're going to remove the record results from the search results. So for example, I've got a 1900 census attached here, which means because I've already found her in the 1900 census, she probably does not appear again in the 1900 census. So it doesn't matter how many other Lillian Noacks or Lillian Cowens show up in that census, we're just going to remove or automatically SMART filter the 1900 census results out of your search. And so you can see here, I've got SMART filtering active. These are the databases of records that are probably going to be mostly filtered out of my search results. Now, city directories are a little unique because somebody doesn't just appear in a city directory once. They're going to appear over and over and over again. City directories are a secret weapon. They are one of the ways that you trace people between censuses. Censuses are only taken every 10 years, whether that's here in the US or in Canada or in the UK. There's only a census taken every 10 years. And a lot of times we lose the thread of the story of that person's life in that ensuing decade. Another benefit of city directories is that they very often allow you to differentiate between people with the same name because it often has information about occupation or employer. Sometimes it'll have, you can find other people in the household. And so it helps you kind of start to tease apart people with the same name in the same place at the same time and not conflate them as the same person or follow the wrong person altogether. The other benefit of city directories is that every once in a while you get lucky and it records the death information of a person. So city directories, as they trace a person through their community, sometimes it will now list, instead of John and Mary Smith, it will list Mary Smith, widow of John. And now you know from this year to this year that John died because you've been tracking them through the city directory. So city directory results are not filtered out of your search results with SMART filtering because somebody can appear multiple times. And so because I found a lot of records for her already, now I can see exactly what is showing up here in these city directories are new records that I haven't looked at yet. So here's a 1938 record from when she was already married and living at their house on Glendon Avenue in West Los Angeles. Here is a 1911 city directory. That is, she was 19 years old that year, and she's living at 3024 Adolph Street in Dallas. That's the house where her parents were living when she grew up. She grew up in that house. That's the house my grandfather visited when he visited his grandparents. And it lists her as a stenographer. And so I can kind of trace her through, right? Now she's Mrs. Lillian Cowan, so she's married, but she's still living at that Adolph Street address. Well, that's because my great-grandfather was away at war. So you start to piece together information by looking through these records. Now, every once in a while, you're going to come across a record like this one, for example, that is not her. This is someone named Lillian Cowan. She's living in Los Angeles. That should seem like the right name, the right place, the right time, but she wasn't married yet. So she shouldn't be Lillian Cowan. And she hadn't moved to California yet. So she shouldn't be living in California in 1913. So you have to filter through your search results, just like you have to filter through your hints to determine, is this record really for my person? Or is this just a record for a person with the same or similar name living in a place they lived, that Ancestry is just saying this information might match? So that is the purpose of search from tree. It is just to kind of take a look at this first or maybe second page. I don't go to the second page very often of search results and just kind of see what bubbles up to the top that you haven't looked at yet that you might want to save to your tree. So that's what I want you to do when you do a search from tree. So you're going to review your hints, then you're going to do a search from the tree. Then the third part of my very sequential search strategy is you are going to do what we call database specific searching. And here's what I mean by that, and here's why you're going to do that. So if I come back here to Great Grandma Lillian and I look at the records I've already attached for her, one of the things that you might notice, I hope, is that we're missing some information. So what's missing here? I have a 1900 census, a 1910 census, a 1930 census. I'm missing a 1920 census. It didn't come up in hints. It didn't come up in that first page of search results. So I'm going to need to go search for her intentionally in that 1920 census database to see if I can find her. And again, there's a lot of reasons why records might not come up in hints and searches. And mostly it has to do with the fact that the information on the record doesn't match quite closely enough with the information we already know about her. And so Ancestry is not going to point us to it or recommend it to us unless it has a high degree of confidence that this information might be connected. I can go through the rest of these records. The records in this center column are actually organized alphabetically or alphanumerically. So you'll see all the censuses usually up top in chronological order. And then the rest of the databases or records that you've saved here are going to be listed in alphabetical order by the name of the database title. So you can skim through the list, but when it gets long, that gets a little tedious. Or you can come up here and click on any fact you have in your tree, and we'll draw lines to show you the supporting sources that support that fact. And so what I'm looking for is, do I have a birth record for her? So I have a Texas marriage record, I have a California death record, but I'm missing a birth record. One of the things to keep in mind is that A, not all records that we expect to find even exist. And B, just because the record exists doesn't mean it's been made public or been published on Ancestry yet. So every state and every country have different privacy laws regarding when they make information publicly available. And then there are different reasons why some organizations do not have information digitized yet, or they have it digitized on their own site. Sometimes they give copies to Ancestry, sometimes they won't. So keep those things in mind as well. So I'm missing a 1920 census for my grandmother, and I'm missing a birth record. So let's go search for specifically that 1920 census search record and see if we can find it. The fastest way to get to any single database on Ancestry is to use the card catalog. Now, if you've spent any time with me online or at genealogy conferences or on social media, you know the card catalog is my favorite thing on the entire Ancestry website. I'm pretty sure that makes me a total nerd, and I embrace that fully. So under the search menu, so your main search menu on Ancestry, if you scroll down, you're going to find the card catalog down here toward the bottom half of that page. And so I'm going to go ahead and open the card catalog. This is going to show you a listing of all, at this moment, 33,811 different databases of individual sets of records on Ancestry. Now, some of those databases are massive. For example, our most recently published database was just published this last week. It is aerial photos from vintageaerial.com of rural locations in 41 states between 1950 and 1990. So aerial photos taken of places and states where your family may have lived at the time they may have lived there. So I don't know if you ever go on like Google and put in an address of like from a census or a draft card or somewhere where your family may have lived to see what it looks like today. This will allow you to see what it looked like back then. And this database contains 17.9 million records. Do you see that? In one database. And as you scroll through, you'll see different database titles, different amounts of records in each of those databases. So some of the individual databases on Ancestry are massive and some of them are tiny, and they're all different places. Again, 88 countries around the world, all different kinds of records, all different resources for you to discover more about your family story, and then to be able to preserve and share that family story. Because I hope you're sharing your family stories. It's not just about finding them. I want you to be sharing them too. So I'm going to come in here in the card catalog, and let me just give you a quick tutorial about the best ways to use the card catalog. Here's Card Catalog 101. If you're brand new to this, what I want you to do is I just want you to put in the name of a state or a province or a county in England maybe, or a country where your family lived. So just one specific location where your family lived. So I might come in here and type in California. And let me make this a little bit bigger again so you can kind of follow along here. I'm going to put California in the search field and then click search. And it's going to take those 33,811 databases down to just 270 specific databases with records just for the state of California. I can do that again for any state or for any country, and it will show me all of the databases on Ancestry that are specific to that place. So that's Card Catalog 101, is just go in and play with it and explore. You're not going to break anything. It is a totally safe space for you to try searching by location. That's the foundation there. Now, once you've found a location of interest, then you can use, so 225 databases from Texas. In the card catalog, once you have narrowed the list down to a specific set of locations, you can then narrow it further by record type. And the best way to do that is to use these filters here on the left-hand side. So I'm going to click birth, marriage, and death, and that's going to take those 225 databases down to 30. So for Texas, there are 30 databases on Ancestry that have birth, marriage, and death information in them. Remember, we're looking for her birth record. I am specifically interested in what birth records are available for Texas. And there are 10 databases. That's a list I can go through. That's a list I can look at and consume pretty easily. And so this is what I want you to get in the habit of doing, is come into the card catalog, because remember points A and B, records might not exist. And if a record does exist, it might not yet be on Ancestry. The card catalog allows you to see if the record exists on Ancestry, because I don't want you searching and searching and searching and searching for a birth record only to find out that it doesn't even exist. So when I look at this list of databases in Texas, I can see that there's some Episcopalian church records. Well, my family, this particular great-grandmother, born a Lutheran, died a Lutheran, and so I doubt she will be in the Episcopalian records. I have Catholic records, probably not going to be there. There are some Methodist records, probably not going to be there. Here is a list of 6.5 million state birth certificates for Texas, but they start in 1903. And my great-grandmother was born in 1892, which means that there's probably not a birth record for her. because 1903 may be, and I would probably want to just go Google this to make sure, but 1903 may be the earliest year that Texas started keeping birth records at a state level. So a birth certificate probably doesn't exist for my great-grandmother. Now, she was Lutheran, and so I could, and this is kind of card catalog 201 if you want a little more advanced, you can start playing around with different words in that title field to see what else might come up. So I could, for example, come in here and say, you know what, which of these databases contain specifically Lutheran baptismal records that might have birth information? And are any of those databases specific enough, right, that they might have information about my family? So here's 3.6 million US evangelical Lutheran church records in America, dating in the right time period, but they're for the Swedish American Lutheran Church. She was German Lutheran, and so I could check this database, but might not be what I'm looking for. So that's kind of the way that you're going to start thinking about the card catalog, is use it to see if the records you're looking for even exist. Now, another little tip about the card catalog is check it often, because the default sort on this list is by date added. You can also switch that to date updated. And what will always show up at the top of the list in the card catalog is new, brand new, or updated databases of records on Ancestry. So very often we take existing databases and we add more records to them. In the case of the newspapers.com marriages and obituary indexes, for example, newspapers.com is continually digitizing new newspapers. Some of those newspapers are actually new, papers published within the last few months. Some of those papers are just new to newspapers, meaning they just found another collection of newspapers from the 1800s from upstate New York or from northern Texas. So they digitize those and make those available, and they become new on the site. And so those indexes to those records on newspapers.com get updated on Ancestry every few months. And so those, you'll see these databases just keep growing. Sometimes, remember I said every state has different privacy laws regarding what information they make public. Usually those privacy laws are time-bound. So for example, here in the state of Utah, there is a 100-year privacy law on birth records, which means birth records are not made publicly available for 100 years. Well, that means that every year, a new year of records become publicly available. So about every 5 to 10 years, Ancestry will go back to those states and get the new chunk of records for the last 5 or 10 years, and will publish those on Ancestry so that you have access to those newly publicly released records. So use the card catalog, if for nothing else, just to keep up with what's been added new and what databases have been updated. Now, I talked about a database-specific search, and the missing record from my grandmother's profile, other than the birth record, which now we suspect may not even exist, is going to be that 1920 census. So anytime I'm looking to search a specific census database, the fastest way to find it is just to type the year and the word census into the card catalog, and you'll see there it comes up right there at the top, the 1920 census, all 107 million records in that database. And I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And that's going to take me to what we call the database-specific search page. So if you are looking for somebody in a record you haven't found them in yet, I don't want you searching all 68 billion records on Ancestry and having to wade through all those city directories and yearbook photos and public record indexes. Like, those are great to just do a global general search from the tree, see what bubbles up to the top of the list. But if you really are looking for something specific, come to the database page and search from there, because that's only going to search the, what did we say, 106, 107 million records, 107 million records that are in just this one database. It's going to give you greater control over accounting for all the variabilities in spelling and dates and places. Okay? Now, I have searched for Lillian in this census quite a few times and I have yet to find her. So if we get lucky today, you might hear me let out a exclamation. You may even get to see a little bit of a genealogy dance, but I'm hoping that by showing you this, you're going to learn some search tips and techniques specifically to apply when looking for your own family members. One thing is to be familiar, especially with women, with what their name was at the time. Women, unlike most men, do not always have a consistent name. So their surname changes every time they get married. And sometimes they change it back to an old surname, maybe not even their maiden name. Maybe it was a previous husband because they have children. And so you see a lot of fluctuation in names for women. When you enter women into your family tree, you always enter them by their maiden name and their maiden name only. That's it. That's the genealogical standard. You may have noticed that when I did the search from the tree, it included her married name. And that's because I have her husband attached to her in the tree. And so the system automatically knows at some point in her life, she may have also used this surname. And so when I search from the tree, it adds that maiden name that I've got her entered with, and then it also appends her married name for that search. But in your tree, you just keep her entered as her maiden name only. If you don't do that, here's what the system ends up searching. If you had her in the tree as Lillian Elsa Noack Cowan, then you went and did a search from the tree or the hint algorithm, it's going to be looking for Cowan, right? Because it's going to append the name of her husband for those algorithms for search and hinting. So we're going to enter women in the family tree by their maiden name, but we're going to pay attention to the timeline. So I'm looking for a 1920 census. And what that means is that I need to understand at least about when she would have gotten married. Now, I have a marriage record, so I know exactly when she got married. I also have a bunch of letters that her husband wrote her while he was in the military, shortly after they got married, because she'd gone back home to live with her parents while he served in World War I. But understanding where she might have lived at the time. Now, she also had a child born in 1920, and so understanding when and where my Aunt Dorothy was born is important. Now, Aunt Dorothy was born in September of 1920 in Little Rock. The census in 1920 was taken not in September. Census day changes. Usually it's in April or June, and every census day is different. And so knowing when census day was sometimes is going to help you know where to find people as well. Sometimes that information is down here on the database page below the search form. So if you just scroll down, every single database on Ancestry has a search form. If there are images included in that collection, meaning the archives allowed us to have images of the record, not just a transcription of the record, you're going to see this browse box over here on the database page. And then if you scroll down, you're going to see source citation information. So this is where Ancestry got these records from and kind of what that source citation is. And then below the source information is going to be a database description. These database descriptions are probably one of the most underutilized resources on Ancestry. They give you so much rich information about the records, because understanding a little bit about the records when you view a record means you know how to interpret that data into your family tree correctly. It also helps in situations like this where I'm trying to figure out how should I search? Where should I be searching? What should I be searching? The database description can inform that. And then the other thing that the database description can inform is to let you know what to do next. If this is just an index, where can I go to get a copy of the original record? What archive has that? If there is another companion set of records that's going to give me more information, that kind of information will be included here in the database description. So I encourage you to read them. I think they're super, super resourceful and really great information. Now, one of the things that I'm just skimming through this looking for right now is what was Census Day? And in this case, it's telling me that the 1920 census was begun on January 1st, 1920. And so all responses were supposed to reflect who was living in the household on the 1st of January, even if the census taker didn't show up to your house until February, because January 1st was Census Day that year. So Census Day changes. Okay, so understanding when that was means you'll know what to look for. So the fact that Aunt Dorothy wasn't born until September means January 1st, they probably weren't even pregnant yet. They might not have even been together because he had been off serving in World War I, and he then became career military and was stationed in different places. She was living at home in Texas with her family. And so I can go double check and see, is she living with them? I can look through city directories around the time and see if I can pinpoint where they might be living. But I do know that within a few months, they end up in Little Rock. So when I come here to search in this specific database, I kind of want to keep all of that information in mind so that I can search more effectively. Because the reason it didn't come up as a hint, the reason it didn't come up when I just did a general search from my tree is because something on this record is going to be spelled wrong or listed wrong or off from what I expect it to be. Maybe they're not going to be living where I expect them to be living. Maybe her age is going to be wrong by a few years. Maybe their name is going to be spelled differently. So if it didn't come up as a hint or a search result, it's probably going to be information recorded not quite the way I expect it to be, which means when I'm doing a database specific search, I need to get a little creative. So here are some of my top creative tips for searching on Ancestry. The first thing I want to do is I am just going to type in what I believe her name to be at the time. And I know she was born in 1892 in Texas. I don't know where she should be living. And then I'm going to make sure that none of that information is exact. So sometimes you have to check and uncheck this little match all terms exactly box just to clear the filters. So you can see here, every field has its own set of filters that I can set and control. But I want to do my first search without any of those filters set. And because I'm searching in this specific database, the less information I provide, possibly the more useful search results I'm going to get. So I'm going to go ahead and click search with just given name, surname, birth year, and birth location. Now there are 215 search results that come up. And I can skim through these usually pretty quickly to get an idea of what kinds of things are showing up. Now remember, you've just given the search result, the search engine, a given name, a surname, a birth date, and a location. That's 4 pieces of information. And at the top of the list, what you're going to see are people who match all 4 of those pieces of information. And there's only one. This woman, Lillian Cowan, born in 1892 in Texas. Then there's nobody else with all 4 of those pieces of information that match. So the search engine tries to give me some variance based on that. So those 4 pieces of information. So here's someone with the same name, born about a year off. Here's someone with the same name, born a few years off. Here's someone with the same name, born a few years off. Here's someone with the same last name and a wife with the same first name or a variant of that, born in Texas about the same time. So do you see what's happening? The search engine is taking those 4 pieces of information and it's saying, if we have anything that matches all 4 of those exactly, we're going to put that at the top of the list. But then we're going to take each of those 4 fields independently and start giving you combinations of information that match 2 or 3 of those fields closely. And that's how we deliver what we call these ranked search results to you. So I can usually tell within about a half to a first page glance what I might want to do next. I'm not going to sit and go through all, in this case, 5 pages of search results, 50 records per page, in order to find what I'm looking for. I am just going to refine my search. This is what we call iterative searching. I just like to call it research. I know, it was a bad joke. Okay, the idea is you search and then you research and then you research just to see what comes up. So here is where the filters start to come into play. I am going to mark some of these things exact so that I can control what I get back in my search results. For example, I have never seen a record, any of the records about her life, that say anything other than she was born in Texas. Texas is what's recorded on the census. So I know she was born in Dallas, but I'm not going to put Dallas in that field because I'm searching a census. And the census only lists the state or the country as the birth location. So I'm going to mark Texas exact. Now, I also know that her age is pretty consistently reported, but I do know the census has some weird wiggle room sometimes. So I'm going to mark that exact, but then I'm going to say plus or minus 2 years, just to give myself a little range. And then I'm going to go ahead and click search again, just to see what happens. I've gone from 250 search results down to 4, and you can see again that one woman with that name is the only one that comes up. And now we're getting people with different first names, but the same last name, a spouse with the same first name, same birthplaces and locations, because I said, only show me people born in Texas within 2 years of 1892. And that tells me she's not going to be listed in there by this name the way that I expect her to be. Now, the number one piece of information, especially on censuses and passenger lists, for example, that is most often incorrect in our view is the way that a name is spelled. And yet every single one of us do this. We start by searching with the name. So what if you searched using wildcards to account for all of the different ways that a name might be spelled or misspelled? On Ancestry, there are 2 wildcards that you can use. One of them is an asterisk, which replaces multiple characters in a word. And another one is a question mark, which replaces a single character in a word. So here is how I would use these when looking for Lillian. So I'm going to just completely clear and reset this form so that it's completely blank. There we go. Okay. And then I'm going to try searching for variations of her name. Now, her name is Lillian, but it might have 1 L in the middle, or it might have 2 L's in the middle. It might be abbreviated or nicknamed as Lily, IE, or Lily Y, again, with 1 L or 2 L's. So there's lots of different ways Lillian could be spelled or nicknamed. So I'm going to just put in L-I-L and then an asterisk, and I'm going to mark that exact. So I want to see anybody in the entire 1920 US Census whose name is spelled L-I-L something, or maybe L-I-L nothing, because that asterisk replaces 0 characters or a dozen characters. Okay. Now, her last name at the time should be Cowan, C-O-W-A-N. It's my last name as well. But sometimes that last vowel gets written as an E, or sometimes it gets written as an I. So I can use a question mark to replace that last vowel. So an asterisk replaces any number of characters. A question mark just replaces 1 character, so it kind of forces that constraint. If I used an asterisk in the place of that, I could, but then it would give me C-O-W any number of letters N, not just C-O-W 1 letter N. So that's why I choose to use one of those 2 characters. And again, I'm going to mark that exact. Now, if you forget, like I hope you're taking notes, but if you forget what I'm sharing with you right now, I hope you'll remember this. When you're using the filters on any of the search forms on Ancestry, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of different search forms on Ancestry, 1 for every database. When you're using the search forms in the name field and you go to Market Exact, you get this little pop-up window. In that pop-up window is a link that says about these settings. And there is an entire help article on Ancestry that explains exactly what those filters are and includes details about how to use wildcards effectively. So you just click that little link and it will take you directly to the help article, which apparently, because I'm on Zoom, is taking forever to load. And that will give you details about that wildcard searching so that you can get some further instructions about how to use it specifically for your family names. Now, I'm going to give you a little homework assignment. And you can, if you're watching live, you can't hit pause. But if you're watching this on YouTube later, you can hit pause and try it. And so I want you to do that. I want you, in a notebook, I hope you have a genealogy notebook. In a notebook, I want you to write down one of the family surnames for somebody who you are missing information for. So in my case, the last name is Cowan. I'm missing that 1920 census. And then I just want you to brainstorm, like on that piece of paper, all the possible different ways that name could be spelled. Ways that letters get misinterpreted when they're written messy on a piece of paper and then somebody tries to index them. Ways that if somebody heard that surname with a German accent, how they would think it was spelled. Ways that vowels get messed up or double letters get left on or off, like just all the different ways that that surname could be spelled. And what I suspect you'll find when you go through that exercise is that there are probably just 2 or 3 different variations of letters with a wild card that you could try searching for that would account for almost all of those different spelling variations. And so you can do a search with one and then research with the next one and then research with the next one. So you're doing kind of that iterative searching, looking for how could this name have possibly been misspelled. So those are the 2 wild cards, an asterisk and a question mark. And you'll notice I put no other fields in. I just want to say, show me everybody in the country whose name starts with LIL and whose surname is COW something N. And I get a list of the 133 women in the United States in 1920 who fit that criteria. And again, I can go through all 133 of them. In this case, that's only going to be what, 4 pages, 5 pages of 50 people each, right? I can go through them kind of skimming through the list, or I can dive back in and play around with the search criteria again. In this case, I happen to know that she's married. I don't know if she's living with her husband again because he was in the military, but I can put in his name. His name is Frederick. And sometimes almost always he went by Frederick. Sometimes it was Frederick with an E in the middle, sometimes without the E in the middle. Even when he wrote his own name, he spelled it 2 different ways. And sometimes it's Fred, and sometimes it's, Fred R. And sometimes, his son my grandpa was named after his dad. And sometimes my grandpa went by Freddie, like that's what my grandma called him, right? So you have to, again, think through all the variations of that name and how it might show up on a record and use the wild card appropriately. So now I want to see everybody with a name, starts with Lil, COW something N with a husband named Fred. There is only one of them in the whole country. She's born in Kansas, living in Kansas. Her husband's name is Fred D. Her parents were born in Illinois and Missouri. She's a saleswoman in a candy shop. That is not my person. My person was a stenographer born in Texas with parents born in Germany. So no luck. Okay, let me give you one more really sneaky advanced search technique. If the name is the thing that is most often spelled wrong on a record, what if you searched without a name? You do not have to search with a name. I could come in here and I could say, I want to see every person in the United States born within 2 years of 1892 in Texas and mark those both exact. And that's going to tell me that there were, how many? This is real iterative searching right here. There were 344,000 of them. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to say, well, really what I want is every person born within 2 years of 1892 in Texas with a father born in Germany, mark that exact, and a mother born in Germany, mark that exact, and she is female, the person I'm looking for. And I'm going to click search. And that's going to take those 344,000 people down to 3,700 people. And so then I have to think, what else other than her name makes her unique? Well, she's got that spouse, so maybe his name is spelled correctly, even if hers isn't. So I'm going to put him in there. And that's going to tell me, with this criteria, there are only 52 people in the country. So I can go through this list, 52 women born within 2 years of 1892 in Texas with parents born in Germany and a husband named Fred. And can I look through these records and see, is there any name that just looks like a complete and total misspelling of Lillian? That the letters got mixed up, or this might be interesting, right? Here's a Lily Salazar with a Fred R. Now, my great-grandfather's name was Fred R. My great-grandmother's name is Lily. I'm going to right-click this link, open it in a new tab. Life-saving thing. If you don't do this, if you click the record, it's going to change the website, and then you're going to have to go back to the search results, and sometimes you lose your place, sometimes you lose the search. But if you right-click on the record and open that link in a new tab, now you can view the record and see, is this really for my person? So I can look and I can say, parents born in Germany, this couple's living, they don't have a baby yet. How old is her husband? Where was he born? I can right-click on the image and open it in a new tab so that I can toggle back and forth between what the actual image says and what the index says. And I can look at this record to determine, is this really for my person? Now, why would I be looking at a family with the last name of Salazar? Well, the reason is because sometimes last names just get entered completely incorrectly on the census. Sometimes they accidentally ditto down the name of the household before them. Sometimes there's somebody living, they're living in the household of somebody else, and rather than change the last name, they just dittoed it down in the same household. And so now the Borders all have the same last name as the person whose home they're living in. So I always look at the original image to see, is there any misinformation? Now, in this case, I can tell you right away there's not, because her husband is a little too young. He was born in Texas with parents born in Mexico. And I'm looking for a Fred who was born in Ohio with parents born in Ohio. So not him, but it was worth looking at. And now I close those tabs and I'm right back here to my original search list. So unfortunately, the search for Lillian in the 1920 census continues, but I hope that you've thought through all of the different ways that your ancestor's name could be spelled. Use those wildcards smartly and be willing to play around with the search parameters and research using different fields of information to see if you can get to a manageable list of results to review. Because hints are easy. Searching from the tree is also pretty easy. You just click a button. But the real family history puzzle happens when you have to dig into these records and look for things that are missing. And usually they're missing because they weren't quite recorded the way we would expect them to be. So the search for Lillian continues, but I hope that this was helpful. I hope you'll use that card catalog. And I hope before you go today that you will please, in the chat, if you're watching this live, in the comments, if you're watching this on YouTube, type out one new thing you learned today that you're going to take and apply to your own family history journey. There's two reasons I love that. One is because it helps me know what you're learning, because I show up here almost every Wednesday, and when I can't make it, one of my colleagues does, to give you more education. And if you go to ancestry.com/education, you'll see the upcoming events that you can register for. You'll also see the videos of our previous events on that page. Again, ancestry.com/education. So just knowing what you're learning helps me create additional education for you and kind of keep it in the right zone of where you need help. The other reason I want you to type out what you learned today is because I firmly believe that if you have to articulate it, you're more likely to remember it. And I want you to remember what was most important to you today so that you can apply it immediately to your family history. So go do those searches. If you have success, please find me on social media. I'm at Krista Cowan everywhere, and let me know what your successes are. I always love hearing about those. Of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can just leave that here in the comments. That's all I have for you today. Until next time, I'm Krista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.